Good afternoon, everyone. The Healthcare Distribution Alliance is pleased to continue our educational commitment as an association to bring you this webinar entitled Management of Specialty Therapies in Today's Complex Supply Chain and Expert Discussion. This webinar is sponsored by Cardinal Health 3PL Services. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded. All participant lines will remain muted during the broadcast. This one-hour program and full recording and presentation slides will be made available on HCA's website by Friday, September 18th. This webinar is for information and educational purposes only. The presentation here is made to inform and stimulate discussion. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A feature to ask questions online at any point during the event. Type your question into the Q&A box on the lower right side of your screen, then click the send button. Our speakers will take questions after their presentation. I would now like to hand it over to John McWinney at Cardinal Health 3PL Services to introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Sabrina. Again, my name is John McWinney, and thank you so much for joining us today to discuss the management of specialty therapies in today's complex supply chain. I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Shantice Marchbanks, and we are really excited to have Heidi Hagen joining us from Veneti. She is the co-founder of Veneti, and we've invited her to participate in this webinar with us today as Cardinal Health has recently entered into a commercial partnership with Veneti, really to develop some enhanced solutions to support cell and gene therapy manufacturers. So we do have some really exciting content for you today. We're going to do some brief introductions, and then we'll probably dive into some really exciting content for you. So as I mentioned, my name is John McWinney. I'm a Director of Business Development for our third-party logistics business. I have been supporting and really working for Cardinal Health for the last 18 years, but ultimately supporting our 3PL business for the last 8 years. And really in that role, I have the opportunity to really work with emerging pharmaceutical and biotech manufacturers as they're ultimately looking to develop commercial strategies to get their products to market. So that can really be cell and gene therapy products, specialty products, or your traditional wholesale and retail products that are ultimately getting to market. Today, we really help focus our manufacturers on defining the appropriate channel strategy. What are the right commercial solutions to help them be successful in getting to market? And then that can be inclusive of also sample services, telesampling, and really the complete 3PL services inclusive of order-to-cash management, warehousing and distribution, et cetera. Now, specifically for our conversation today, I've had the opportunity to really support a number of emerging cell and gene therapy manufacturers as they've been really developing the solutions for ultimately how do they manage the order-to-cash to sell their products to their end customers. Specifically in the landscape today, that's really focused around academic medical centers and centers of excellence. So I've really had the pleasure of working with those organizations, and of course some future organizations will be launching here in the near term as well. So really excited for those opportunities. So Shantice, why don't I turn it over to you for an introduction?
Yes, thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shantice Marchbanks, and I'm Director of Implementations at the Cardinal 3PL. I joined Cardinal in 2006, and during that time, I've had an opportunity to work in various different roles within the organization. During that time, I've been given the opportunity to guide many biopharma companies in establishing new programs and developing new products and services specifically in the cell and gene therapy space. I've also had the opportunity to work with cell and gene manufacturers to develop standard operating procedures and guidelines, as well as an opportunity to work with the sites of care directly with implementing the programs for the cell and gene therapy treatment, as well as onboarding them into the 3PL space. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Shantice. Now, before I turn it over to Heidi for an introduction, I thought it would be beneficial for me to share a little bit about how Cardinal Health Specialty Solutions ultimately supports emerging cell and gene therapy manufacturers that are looking to get to market. So for us, often at times, that really starts with our regulatory sciences organization, and really, how are they helping emerging manufacturers kind of navigate the regulatory pathways? And that can really be from preclinical through phase 3 and ultimately through to commercial launch, but really helping them support with really all of those regulatory filings with any of the agencies. Next, we see a lot of engagement with our real-world evidence and outcomes organization. Specifically, our HEOR experts really have the ability to help establish therapeutic value to support reimbursement. And oftentimes, this is done through value-based alternative payment methods, establishing price transparency, and as I mentioned previously, really kind of some of that real-world evidence and outcomes. Now, one of the areas we see kind of a really increased need, specifically in the cell and gene therapy space, is really the need for kind of some patient access and support services. Now, this is really managed by our full-service hub services called Synexus Health. And their role and responsibility kind of within the cell and gene therapy space is really how do you ultimately help remove barriers to care and help ensure the right support and coordination is provided for those patients throughout that patient journey. And oftentimes this is really done through navigating any sort of reimbursement challenges or hurdles, helping to support with any sort of financial assistance or foundation assistance, and really ultimately kind of how do you ensure that those patients can be at that site of care to receive the appropriate therapy. So this can be done through some travel and lodging support, but at the end of the day, our hub service is really there to help remove obstacles so that the patient can receive the life-changing therapy that they've been prescribed. Now, where Shantice and I have ultimate responsibility is really around the third-party logistics services order-to-cash management. As you can see, we've got quite a bit of experience in this arena. Over on the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see we've processed over 3,000 cell therapy orders to date, in excess of $1.1 billion in gross sales. Now, one of the things we'll be sharing with you throughout our conversation today is really around ultimately what are we doing to kind of engage with those sites of administration. We've had the opportunity to onboard over 125 sites of administration, and this is a very unique process, and I think something that we can share some really great guidelines around as you're working with these sites to make sure this is going to be a seamless process for them. But ultimately, within that order-to-cash management, organizations within the cell and gene therapy space are ultimately looking to us for really some of that customer service background, customer service solutions, our accounts receivable solutions, as well as anything related to our contract and chargeback management as well. Now, of course, when you think about Cardinal Health, you're obviously going to be thinking about site of care logistics and anything we can do from a logistics perspective. And we do have the capability to really manage that through the ability of our nuclear and precision health solutions. Through their network of about 1,500 couriers across the country and their real-time insights and visibilities within the supply chain, they really have the ability to help support all of the activities associated with kind of moving products throughout the cell and gene supply chain. So, for example, that could be moving product from an apheresis center to the manufacturing site and back from the manufacturing site to the site of administration. So with that, Heidi, why don't I pause and give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and maybe share some of Veneti's capabilities.
Great. Hello, everybody, and it's great to be here with my Cardinal colleagues. I am a co-founder and advisor of Veneti. My background includes 30 years of experience in the biotech industry, primarily as an operations executive on the therapeutic side. In addition to working with Veneti, I currently sit on 3 boards. 2 of those boards are public cell therapy companies. One is a clinical stage neoantigen TCR and gene therapy company called Zyopharm. Another one of those companies is a commercial cell therapy company with 2 of the oldest cell therapies, which are Macy and Epicel, and that is with a company called Vericell. And additionally, I sit on a private company board, which is a contract manufacturing organization for the cell and gene therapy space. And that is called Lichen Biosciences. And I can give you a little bit of a background now on what Veneti is and why it's important to this space and important to the partnership that we discussed with Cardinal. So Veneti provides a cloud-based and configurable personalized therapy platform. And really what this does is it enables the cell therapy companies or gene therapy companies to collect and manage the data across the complete value chain and intensively in the supply chain. And that's what you find with a lot of these advanced therapies is a need for really a wide ecosystem in which this data is collected. It is a software platform that has been built specifically for personalized therapy, so it's not something that's been tailored. It's actually built from the ground up specifically to manage all of the data and all of the transactions that you can imagine throughout the supply chain. And some of our experience we've highlighted here for you is we've had thousands of patient treatments go through the process and through our data collection and management. We automate the chain of identity, chain of custody, and chain of condition. For those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, it basically ensures that the right patient gets the right product at the right time and manages all of the processes throughout in a way that is regulatory compliant. Integrations are key. You have an ecosystem that is participating now, and that is one of the most important things in terms of our partnership with Cardinal is the ability to integrate and connect with critical parts of the ecosystem that are in the order to cash realm that Cardinal is working with. We also enable sophisticated scheduling of manufacturing slots, which can be rare and compressed at times, depending upon the resources available for the therapeutic company. And we enable the shipping from hospital and labs worldwide. So you can manage a product and be in one part of the world and manage your product in another part of the world. And with this, of course, we drive more efficient manufacturing and supply chains and an ability to fulfill these orders on a daily basis. And once again, the right patient, the right product at the right time. And of course, all of this needs to be wrapped up in the appropriate regulatory regulations that ensure that you are being compliant with not just the legal requirements, but also with groups like the CFDA, the FDA, and the EMA. So worldwide, it's important to tie all those together, and we have a platform that enables you to do that in a one-stop shop.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Heidi. So really to kind of begin our conversation for today, we really want to provide kind of a high-level approach to really what are we viewing in the specialty marketplace today. So as we kind of look towards really kind of where we're seeing the growth in the specialty market, as we look out to about 2023, about 60% of the total drug spend will be for specialty products. And as you think about kind of new products that are coming to market as well, about 65% of those are going to be specialty products. So as we think about this through the Cardinal Health lens, specifically from a channel perspective, as you can see, it's going to be a significant growth both in the specialty distribution, but then also in the specialty pharmacy space. Now, as we kind of take a step back and even think about this through the lens of the cell and gene therapies, based upon where those sites of administration are actually occurring today, primarily with the academic medical institutions and centers of excellence, we're really managing a lot of the order to cash components through our 3PL organization, or kind of that SD capability. Now, as products potentially shift to maybe the outpatient setting or the community-based setting in the future as new cell and gene therapy products come to market, I think we view the role of the SP to probably be growing in that circumstance as kind of we move into that outpatient setting. Now, today, the cell and gene therapies do comprise a pretty small percentage of kind of that total growth within the specialty marketplace, but I know, Heidi, you're pretty close to really kind of where that growth is occurring. So would you like to share a little bit more about kind of where you anticipate the growth within the cell and gene therapy space?
Sure, and if you look at this graph here, this is a good illustrative example of where we see this market going. These are new and innovative therapies. They're really enabling, medical science to tackle, these previous unmet needs that patients in different disease states have had. And, with the success of CAR-T and AAV and some of these early products, we do see a boon, if you will, in the clinical trial space. There are thousands of clinical trials ongoing right now in the cell and gene therapy space. And it's really the basis for that there is an expectation that we will start to see exponential growth in this market, as we've already seen several products continue to come into late stage and go into the commercial phase. And so within the next 5 years, there's an expectation that you could envision a $40 billion market for this. And really that as these products do migrate a bit from, as we discussed in the last slide, is that they're going from an inpatient center of excellence standing to really a widespread greater access and starting to tackle diseases that I think have bigger populations and can help more patients worldwide, but also more patients within the United States on a more distributed basis. And I think that this represents all of those factors coming together with a market growth that really we need to think about where we're going with this and how we're going to address that with the proper services and systems to enable these to be handled properly out in the market, and for healthcare providers and patients to get what they need out of this, very unique set of therapies that are becoming, I think, more and more the norm.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. That is some pretty exponential growth there in a very short period of time. And of course, that does have some pretty large implications, really from the manufacturer perspective. So As we kind of shift to think about, our past experience and kind of joint experience with some clients, specifically with those manufacturers, as you and Shantice are engaging with emerging cell and gene therapy clients, what advice do you provide on potential challenges? How do you avoid them? And any operational considerations they should take into account as really they're preparing for that commercial launch, or kind of at what stage do they begin preparing for some of these implications?
Yeah, I think when you talk about these specialty value chains, there are some really unique factors that need to be taken into account. And, kind of one of the most upfront pieces, if you will, is the fact that, most of these have a living raw material. So we're talking about living, breathing systems, cells that come from either the patients themselves in an autologous setting for a product or donor cells for an allogeneic product. And it cannot be, in any way forgotten that is, the product that is moving through this complete chain is much different than the off-the-shelf small molecules or recombinant proteins. The other part that's, a new piece to this is healthcare providers have always played a critical part in the healthcare system, but you've had a disconnect in some ways, of being able to inventory product and then pull the product off as the healthcare provider would need it. But they now play a critical role in the actual supply chain. And it's a regulated, supply chain for good reasons. We need to ensure safety, ensure that reproducibility, and make sure that the product is going, once again, to the right patient, right product at the right time. And with that comes the natural circular, patient-centric, aspect to that. And there's really no room for error in that. And there's also a need for greater transparency and participation on an equal basis and kind of a handoff between the different participants in that. And with all of this, you naturally have an increased patient risk. And with that, it's something that it's the patient is the center of this, and they need to feel like they're being taken care of. The health care provider needs to be able to get the answers they need. And it really is in a real-time perspective that needs to occur. And then I think there's a whole host of other things that, Shantice, maybe you can comment. We've got some other really unique factors that really kind of fall into some other categories that we need to pay attention to. Oh, Shantice, I think you're muted.
And so from a specialty pharma supply chain perspective, there are some unique differences with the cell and gene therapy market today, whereas patient-specific gene therapies, the specialty services do not actually manage or touch the product. Now, if the product is not specific to a patient, then the specialty or the 3PL partner has the capability of storing and distributing that product. Rather, we're more focused on customizing business rules to support the manufacturer specific requirements of how their business is supposed to be managed. Working with that manufacturer to develop those order-to-cash processes that John mentioned early on during the discussion today. There are lots of components and factors that come into play with that, with the order-to-cash and the chargeback reconciliation. By affording the manufacturer a one-stop shop, it gives them an opportunity not to engage with many vendors, as well as saving on time, resources, cost, and energy, and also helping to train and facilitate the sites of care and the hub services on how the business is supposed to be managed. And we are capable of working with them to create that connected, cohesive experience.
And so if we think about this a little further, we've discussed some of the unique factors that are involved with, the specialty value chains that we're discussing today. But really kind of key to the question I think you were asking too is, what do these new market entrants really need to know? What are the things they need to focus in on? And, what we've tried to outline here is some common challenges to the left. And regardless of which therapy company, you may have a unique process and you may have different steps throughout, but these are kind of the common factors that need to be taken into account. And we've discussed it a couple times, but it can't be emphasized enough, is ensuring that the right patient gets that treatment at the right time every time. It will take only one misstep in order for what could potentially be a catastrophic situation with a patient. And additionally, really, it's a high-touch service that needs to be here to enable all parts of the ecosystem to work together. You have enormous variability in the supply chain, and that I touched on before I discussed number one here, is that each of these products may be classified as an advanced therapy or cell and gene therapy, but really, if you look at the individual unit operations and steps, that you can have variability involved in timing, handling, the type of cell, the type of patient. And so there's really a need for standardization and alignment for scale. And you also have naturally, because you have so many participants in the geographical nature of this, disparate and disconnected. But they're all dependent upon each other. So you need to drive this production and delivery in a way that does feel standard and does meet the right patient at the right time. And then, of course, we naturally have in the world in total, we have lots of manual legacy processes that are being brought into the world of 2020 and beyond. And so we need to bring those forward with new workflows and systems that can really, think about, they don't scale or simplify right now. So what do we need to do that? And so with thinking about that, those are the kind of the common challenges. Now, what are the things you want to avoid as a new entrant? Is really those safety risks to patients. It will not only stop the product, it could very, very well help patients, but it could very much harm your brand. You're also looking at high cost of goods. A lot of these products coming on the market are already high priced. Part of it is a higher cost of goods than you would normally expect, and we're driving that down by some of the standardization. But if you have prolonged processing times, turnaround times, and regulatory intervention, you're just adding to the cost that's already a burden. And so one of the things that we look to in that growth chart we were looking at before is to how do we drive this to a standardized industrial way? Can't underscore this enough is you can get disappointed key stakeholders, and those really are the patients and the healthcare providers, but it is all of your partners throughout the ecosystem that need to work in conjunction and be able to hand off, if you will, that relay baton between them. And you can really get inefficient, disconnected systems that really will not enable you to run your business efficiently, report to the regulatory authorities as you need to, and possibly manage and troubleshoot issues as they come up, which naturally you will always have the occasional ad hoc situation. So how do you manage that? And you need to have good, transparent systems for that. So I feel like that's kind of in total what the newer entrants into this market need to see and understand to start to think about what they have to tackle going forward.
Fantastic. And Shantice, as you think about this through the order to cash lens, what is some of the operational considerations that you've kind of noticed in working with some of these manufacturers and even some of the sites of care?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, defining the customers and the primary points of contact is really critical and paramount at the onset of beginning the exploratory investigation of bringing on board and launching a new cell and gene therapy. Oftentimes, there are various different components that are required to be involved at the sites of care as well as the hub services. The verification and certification process for the qualified sites of care can be a tedious process, and it needs to be clearly defined and thought through as you begin to determine at what point in time your product will be available and on the market to service the patient. In addition to that, working with a 3PL partner or a specialty distributor, whichever your particular model requires, there should be some integration with the hub services or even a Veneti if that comes into play. And it's very critical to understand what those roles and responsibilities are and how each role and responsibility is supposed to be managed. Also, one of the other things that's very critical is preparing the trade notification and training material. Each one of the components of sites of care, the hub services, as well as the 3PL partner or specialty distributor, really needs heavy training on how your product is supposed to be managed, how the patients are being serviced, whether it be through hub services, and then on to identifying, specific functional processes such as the order management process. With our experience, we have noticed that different manufacturers in the cell and gene therapy space have different requirements for ordering processes. Some ask the site of care to go directly through to their 3PL partner or specialty distributor to place the order. Others go directly through a hub services, and the sites of care never actually have any interaction with the 3PL partner or the specialty distributor. So you want to make sure that when you're beginning to launch your product, that you want to engage all of these different organizations as you begin to model the program. And then, of course, identifying those specific processes, their ordering process, the system integration. Heidi had talked earlier about the fact that system integration is very important so that we can afford the site of care an opportunity to have a one-stop shop or have less manual processes that Heidi talked about before. System integrations are capable of capturing all of the unique identifier information and patient-specific information that is required to ensure that the right patient gets the right product at the right time. And then, of course, we'll talk about, chargeback early on because there's a 340B process, and this process can be different from one site of care to the other. It is paramount that everyone understands clearly what those expectations are and how that is going to be managed. Because at the end of the day, a patient may go in for treatment as an outpatient, but may result in an inpatient activity, which will change the outcome of the 340B pricing. And next, I'll just talk briefly about the special program offerings. We've seen that manufacturers differ when these programs are going out to market. The standard terms are typically around 30, 31 days with no cash discount. But what we've seen is those terms have been extended to 60, 90, 120 days, depending upon what the manufacturer desires to do. And it's very important that that is thought about and talked through and explored on early on to be included in part of the training material and the trade notification with each of the sites of care. Reimbursement is another area that should be thought about and taken into consideration early on. And we all know that unfortunately there are various different instances where maybe the patient is just simply too fragile health-wise to be able to receive the treatment, and the treatment probably may have already gone to the site. And in this case, there needs to be a defined process of how the treatment is going to be managed from a financial perspective. And then there should always be a program in place for non-insured and non-respondent patients and how those patients are going to be managed. And finally, prepare returns and credit policies. Now, we know that typically a cell and gene therapy is not something that is tangible, that is going to be returned or moved back to the shelf. However, there are instances that we've experienced in our experiences where we need to have trade policies in place to determine who is responsible for credit reimbursement if it should be required.
No, thank you, Shantice and Heidi. I think one of the things that I gleaned throughout that conversation is really around kind of the need for some standardization within the space, right? There's a lot of unique processes for each of these individual products, and it seems as we're having a lot of conversations with kind of emerging organizations, they're still kind of going down that path of potentially having unique solutions or unique processes, whether or not that's within the supply chain, within the order to cash, or potentially even within the patient services. And that does have an impact on the site of administration or the site of care. So as you guys have been working with, these manufacturers, how have you seen, the impact on the healthcare providers, and how do you kind of provide that feedback back to the manufacturers? And I guess more specifically, since you're so engaged with kind of these sites, have you received any feedback from them on, really what are their recommendations for improving processes, or really how do they lessen the burden on the providers themselves?
I think that's a great question, and we attempted here to give you some snippets of some of the feedback. We've gotten some really good feedback, especially as we talked before. A lot of these products are now in inpatient setting. They're going to be moving to an outpatient, or at least wider into community hospitals and elsewhere. And we're only going to see some of this feedback, I think, become more intensified and push out. And really, healthcare providers are now an active part of this value chain and supply chain. And so they need to be taken into the total process into account of really everything from order to distribution and beyond. And, some of my favorites here, if you are GMP, you have to realize when you're going into healthcare setting and there's collection of cells and then there's live cells being handled on the back end, this is new. They've handled tissue in the past, but there are new requirements that they have to follow in order to ensure proper traceability and to have the proper documentation in terms of batch records going forward. The other side of it is the service side. You know, you can see a couple of different aspects here of, you know, your product is not my day's only problem. These are very complex healthcare medical centers where they're providing, you know, needed treatment and therapies to all kinds of variety of patients and disease states. And so, you know, this needs to be made easy for them. And I think that that's a critical piece of this is simplification and really make it so that they only have the most important information, but they have transparency, everything that they do need. And, you know, I think the other side of it is using technology. And I think that's a great opportunity where Veneti and Cardinal as a partnership is, you know, you've got folks out there who are telling you that you use a computer, fax is still being used, and phone. You know, I mean, it's real every day out there. And so it's something that, you know, we're building these standards and these systems now that to really address these problems that are out there and what can really respond and give the greatest impact to those who are helping these patients, you know, on the front lines every day. I think, you know, when we think about, you know, the healthcare providers and, you know, what some of those quotes and things that they discussed with us here, there's some common pain points that we can, you know, kind of walk through and kind of help really emphasize. These are new patient safety risks. You know, they think about what's in the package insert and, you know, with their prescribing meds and you know, what's in their EHR systems. But now you've got an added aspect here is that this is a product that is being basically tissue extracted, cells extracted, going elsewhere, being manipulated and coming back. And, you know, that's a new added risk. You know, there's an uneven availability of standards, and that was, you know, kind of reflected in those quotes, we can't be doing it differently for every healthcare provider. They have to feel like they can plug into something that makes sense regardless of what the product is, and that then they can really truly leverage that for as many patients as they can. They really are feeling a lack of transparency and communication. It is associated with the standardization aspect, but they really want to know, where is the product? My ability to go in and look at that is really critical for them, and they need to have that real time and available to them. And they also have new roles in this, and they are playing part in a regulated supply chain in addition to being in a complex value chain. And so I think that there are some aspects to that that aren't easy for them. So how do systems and services perhaps give them some ease to that and give them some comfort that they know how to plug into something that really is tried and true? I think there's some other aspects. Shantice, you know, hub services are really critical in this, as we just discussed some of the service aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we talked about hub services, and Heidi mentioned before that, you know, really the cell and gene therapy treatment is really centered around the patient. And so hub services really plays a paramount and critical role in assisting the patient with travel, transportation. As you know, oftentimes the patient hometown is not necessarily in the same geographical area as the research center or the site of care. So oftentimes the patient will require assistance with getting to and from those appointments, as well as some type of coordination with their caregiver. They need to have that caregiver support before, during, and even after the treatment. As we all know, typically after a cell and gene therapy treatment, the patient has about a 30-day surveillance period, if you will, whereas they may have to go back and forth to the site of care for treatment or surveillance, or they just need to check in. And oftentimes the patient's health is already so fragile that they need a constant caregiver who is able to support them throughout that process and also be their advocate and speak on their behalf and make sure that the patient is fully aware of what is transpiring through their journey. And so our hub services that the manufacturers choose to utilize play a critical role in assisting the patient with that. And, you know, we talked about the patient care, but some of the other pain points for the sites of care coming to the invoicing and the statement requirements. So we've already talked today a lot about the sites of care, that some of the sites of care have dedicated cell and gene therapy departments or units of individuals, if you will, who do nothing but manage those cases and those patients. However, other sites of care, they have a plethora of different functional areas within their organization who are managing this process. And so we found that where the invoices are being sent and how they're being sent, whether they're being sent electronically or via mail, or whether those statements are being sent electronically or via mail, is a pain point for the sites of care, as there's a reconciliation process that is required. And so we really, when we start talking about the future, I agree with Heidi that we need to start looking at how do we come up with consistent, systematic ways across all cell and gene therapies to support the sites of care with these types of activities. And that really also goes into departmental correspondence. So, in one instance, we've heard that a pharmacy can actually be responsible for managing the purchase orders and making sure that the orders are sent out for the patient. However, once that pharmacy has done their part in ordering the product, then they're not necessarily involved in the product in the process any longer. And therefore, it will become confusing with the sites of care, or where are we at with the invoicing process, or do we have the invoices? Has the patient been infused, and where are we at in those stages? And finally, we talked about 340B processes today, and as Heidi mentioned before, a lot of the cell and gene therapy treatments are inpatient, but we're seeing more and more of those become outpatient. And what we're finding is that the patient may have gone in for an inpatient therapy that resulted in an outpatient therapy, which oftentimes creates the possibility of having a credit and rebill, depending upon whether the patient was serviced inpatient or outpatient. And that information is very critical for the sites of care, and it can be painful sometimes if it slows down the invoicing process. So, John, I think that we are ready to go on over and start talking about some of our opportunities that we had at the Carseat Summit in 2019. Cardinal performed the Carseat Summit here in Nashville, and we really had a great opportunity to bring in some biopharma companies with healthcare providers and have an advisory board to really talk about some of the things that they've been experiencing in the cell and gene therapy space from a site of care perspective. And so we talked a lot about the patient support, and we talked about that a lot today, about the social support requirements and how it's equally as important, and then also working with the patient to understand the financial eligibility requirements and walking through that. They expressed to us that could be a tedious process, and oftentimes it's a delayed process, and it's very critical to shore that up and improve that, because again, the patients at this particular point have already been through one or two other life-saving treatments that were not effective. And so we want to make sure that we are effectively getting these patients, certified and eligible for the treatment and getting them referred to the appropriate sites of care. And then, of course, the patient and the caregiver readiness is also essential, because, again, the patient really needs to have support throughout the journey of the cell and gene therapy process. And oftentimes the patient, without her services, is not clear on their journey and what is required and, what will be needed. And so, these simple things can sometimes derail the treatment process if not quickly managed. And so they talked a lot about that. And then, of course, the logistics and the coordination. While there are more than 100 sites of care who have been validated and certified, and those whose nurse training is required to administer cell and gene therapy, oftentimes the healthcare providers have difficulty identifying where are those nearby certified centers, and how do they go through the process of getting the patient referred and making sure that the patient can go to those specific locations to get the treatment that they need. And so while all of these components are very important, there's a lot of high touch here with the site of care and the HPC, the caregiver, and the patient. So the patient, is really the journey, and is really the one who needs to be focused on throughout this process. And so we also need to focus on, they talked about what ifs. And, what ifs could go in many various different directions, but the what ifs really come into play when you're talking about the patient. If they're unable to be administered, if the patient expires prior to, if there's an issue that comes up with the verification and eligibility of the patient being, financially able to be administered with their insurance or their Medicaid. So I think that there are various different what ifs that, the sites of care and the healthcare providers are very concerned about today. And so, as I conclude our conversation about the Carseat Summit, we really focused on and talked about the patient eligibility, the coordination of their features, as well as the post-care, which is very critical and paramount as well for the patient. Oftentimes, patients are followed for 5 to 10 years after they receive a cell and gene therapy treatment to review the outcomes and how well they're doing and, what quality of life they have. As we know, cell and gene therapy products can sometimes have adverse effects before they begin to really work and heal the patient. And so we also talked about the financial challenges, and I spoke about those just a little bit today. But where do things get hung up within the system, particularly when you're talking about invoice reconciliation and 340B pricing? Those would be some of the things that we discussed. And so when we continue to talk about common pain points and sites of care, let's look and talk about the business processes. So roles and responsibilities are different from one site of care to another, and sometimes there's a lack of coordination between the 3PL partner, the specialty distributor, or even the hub services, which could create reimbursement delays. And we need to make sure that we're establishing communication flows between the hospitals, the sites of care, and hub services, and any type of other specialty units who specialize in treatment for cell and gene therapy. Contracting, where it relates to 340B, we talked about that extensively already today. It just simply needs to be defined. How is it supposed to be managed? Who's supposed to be notified, when and where, and how about a patient, whether they're being serviced inpatient or outpatient. And finally, there's lots of discussion today about outcome-based contracting. It really requires a well-defined, documented process. It needs to be clearly established what qualifies as a positive outcome, what is a negative outcome, and what triggers whether the patient was positive or negative, and what are the data, what's the data that needs to be gathered. And then, when does the reimbursement occur? And, also, we need to take into consideration what is the length of time of the outcome stage? Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days? Is it a year? What is that time frame? And so I think that these are some of the things that, from a business process, are some of the common pain points that we've heard throughout our journey and experience with the cell and gene therapy space.
No, thank you so much, Shantice and Heidi. I think, we're all going to need to be mindful of kind of what are these processes that are being implemented from the manufacturer perspective, but then also downstream, what is that impact on that site of administration? Really thinking about how really they're playing much more of a larger role, specifically even in the supply chain itself. So really unique. But then as we think about, how therapy potentially transitions from this inpatient academic medical center to potentially going into the community-based setting or outpatient setting, what do you really view as kind of how can a manufacturer be successful in kind of the movement into that setting to ensure the success of those programs?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. As we think about these products truly realizing their goals and having greater access, they really will be seeking to move into the community settings. But there's some things that need to be, some challenges and some aspects of these products that need to be addressed to effectively move them into the community settings. One of the most critical aspects, and this will be kind of, if you will, a trigger point or a turning point to which we really do see these enter into an outpatient and or community, well, both community setting especially, but then outpatient would be beyond that, is to really see improved drug product safety profiles. I mean, currently right now, quite a few of these products have heavy surveillance of patients post-administration. Shantice discussed that a little bit earlier, and have the need for ICU medical care available if needed, and do need so on certain occasions. So once that occurs, I think what we're looking at, and I think with the variety of cell products that we see coming through now, they It's not just a CD8 T cell CAR T type product. We see a variety of TCRs going into solid tumors. We see antigen presenting cells, there's NK cells, and there's Treg cells. So they will be definitely having a different safety profile that will then really force us to think about how do we develop those standardized systems. And so I think some of the things we've talked about is how we are jointly together developing that for the customers and for the ecosystem. And it's going on widely within the industry additionally, but it is one of the things we need to kind of consider on our to-do list. We also need to enable the simple, rapid communication, and that's once again coming into really truly a digital age of healthcare and being able to manage this data in a real time, but real-time access too. So it's one thing to have data available in a database. It's another for all the stakeholders to have participation in that data. And this will really then lend itself to simplifying the supply chain. So I think there are aspects around that that really kind of lend itself into the Cardinal system. So Shantice, your thoughts on that?
Sure. So when we talk about simplifying the supply chain, many of the community healthcare centers of excellence do not have the capability of storing and managing, these deep frozen products. In our experience, we see where you may be billing one entity, but you're shipping the product actually after the approved to different areas for administration. So we really need to start thinking about what we need to do together to improve and simplify the process to make, it's easier for the HCPs and the patient when the patient is going to be administered and knowing up front where that medication is. And, again, we talk about, addressing the amplified concerns around 340B pricing and reimbursement. And this is really an area of a lot of frustration and confusion for the sites of care because it's being driven by the payers and the medical centers and the manufacturers as to how this program and how this process is being managed. So there's an opportunity to investigate that further and to simplify the process as well as standardize the process across the cell and gene therapy space to the sites of care.
Really appreciate that, Shantice. One of the last things we want to do kind of just to wrap up here before we open up the kind of Q&A is really thinking about kind of what are those critical success factors. And Shantice, you even referred to them as the what ifs that really manufacturers need to be prepared for as they're looking towards commercial launch. So maybe you guys can give us some of your kind of last thoughts here on kind of what are those critical success factors and what ifs that manufacturers need to be mindful of.
Yes, I think it's important, and what we've highlighted here visually is, there really are two imperatives to keep in mind as you walk through those various scenarios and think about, really planning out to address those. And that is, patient safety, which is the utmost and paramount aspect for these products. And then, but very quickly goes hand in hand is the simplicity for the healthcare providers. Simplicity will bring greater access, greater penetration, and more use of these products, which we really all want to see for the sake of patients. And we talked about moving into the community setting, and these are two very critical aspects that will drive it there. And, as you think through those scenarios and think about those critical success factors you need to address, it's really building in processes and structures to really think about it being seamless and reliable. A couple ways to do that really is to break down and get into the details, define and truly understand your operational process. Who is involved? What are the specific steps? How do those handoffs happen? Where do they happen? Where can they happen? And the variability that might be involved with that. And then what kind of goes hand in hand with that quickly after that is failure modes and effective analysis. Is basically it's risk management. This is kind of the technical regulatory aspect of it, a tool that's used, but it's basic business too, is really once you know your operational process, you walk through and you really ensure that you truly are able to assess where your greatest risks are and what's the impact, what's the probability of that occurring, and addressing those that are at the highest need. And really, what can come quickly after that, after you've mapped all that out, is to really implement the appropriate modern digital platforms and thinking about the scenarios that you need to address. What markets are you going to be in? Where are you going to be distributing? How are you going to be distributing? And all of that kind of comes part and parcel to that piece. I think that there's some other pieces here. Shantice, do you want to pick up on the last couple for our audience?
Oh, absolutely. So preparing for patient-specific factors. I mentioned some of those factors earlier today, such as patient assistance programs, uninsured patients, patients who are health-wise too fragile to go through the administration of the drug after it has arrived at the site of care for administration. And also, if the patient is unable to be infused, where does the financial responsibility lie? There should be some preparedness and understanding of who owns that, the site of care or the manufacturer, and how is that going to be managed. And then you should also be prepared to anticipate product handling questions and concerns. During our experiences with this, there have been particular extreme scenarios created for those what ifs, and in some cases there may be required to have a product agreement on to how the product is supposed to be handled when it is damaged or something occurs with the product at the infusion center or even at the site of care. So those are just a couple of the things that, during our experience that, we've worked with cell and gene manufacturers to identify and document and put processes in place, and moving forward, that should continue.
Thank you, Shantice and Heidi, very much. And this is very insightful content. Hopefully our audience has enjoyed some of the content we've had. We do have some few minutes left for some question and answers. So it looks like we do have some questions that are coming in here. And it looks like the first one that has come through here is, for cell and gene therapies, does Cardinal Health handle the physical product at any point in the process? And Shantice, I think I can probably address this one since we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in regards to really what our nuclear and precision health solutions business can do. As I mentioned previously, they have a very vast network of distribution where they're already currently managing the distribution of nuclear pharmaceuticals that are going into hospital institutions today. So they have a fleet of about 1,500 couriers across the country. And really, we have the opportunity to leverage this capability really to help support emerging cell and gene therapy manufacturers through the clinical trials to ultimately, clinical trials and commercial product to ultimately manage that product as it's being moved within kind of that supply chain. So even as Heidi was alluded to earlier, right, a lot of those healthcare practitioners are now a component of that supply chain. So having that engagement with either the hospital labs or the apheresis centers to pick the product up from those locations and having that familiarity with engaging with those hospital institutions, I think is a really unique component of how this organization can ultimately kind of manage all of the logistics associated with these cell and gene therapies. As a component to this, they have implemented some really kind of robust technology solutions to make sure they can track the product while it's in transit, whether or not that's through ground transportation or air transportation, et cetera, but really making sure that our clients have the visibility to where the product is at any point within that supply chain. And it looks like we do have another question that's come in here, and maybe Heidi, this one could be a good one for you. So how have you seen, COVID-19, impact, cell and gene therapy manufacturers, whether or not that's from the commercial space or even as they're going through trials and impacts and potentially trying to get through the FDA with any of their submissions?
Great question, and obviously something we are all dealing with regardless of where we are in the ecosystem. COVID-19 is a very important kind of healthcare pivot that occurred, 6 months ago. And really, there's been a lot of attention, as it should be, in terms of the resources and in terms of the healthcare providers turning toward that. However, in parallel with that, we have patients in need who, both on clinical trials and in commercial products, need their therapies and need their therapies on time. And it was during this process that, this industry was a essential industry that could continue to manufacture, had to adjust really honestly everything that they were doing. Clean rooms, fortunately, are naturally just social distancing opportunities. However, some of those processes and procedures were kind of upgraded. I did see, having sit on a board with commercial products and being familiar with several of the commercial products in my career, is that there was a bit of a slowdown with them, but they are actually back in full mode again, and most of them are very close to what you would have said, close to the targets that they were planning in terms of treating patients. And so that's good news. That's good news for the patients especially. So there was a bit of a slowdown as medical centers, had to redirect, but now they're coming back into a new normal. Clinical trials, I think for the most part, the FDA, just so folks are aware, did put out some guidances, and they did so very quickly. I would give them huge congratulations to that. They're very practical guidances too, that really enable you to think about how you can do some things, digitally versus needing to do them on site, and also additionally how you could redirect patients and you could have protocol modifications that would be acceptable. So I encourage everybody to look at that because those guidelines are in effect right now still, despite the fact that I do think what's great is that we've now seen a reopening of quite a few of the clinical trials. However, there was a slowdown. And I would say there were creative means in terms of transportation that were used during this time period. But I would say this is what's great about the industry is that the therapeutic companies really took it to heart and took care of the patients in the background. But no doubt it did have some impact. And I do think that everybody involved with it is finding a way to get back on track. And fortunately, I don't know that we've lost a lot of time, but we have lost, some time in development of some of these products.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heidi. It looks like we only have a few minutes left here, but it looks like we may have time just for kind of one more question that it looks like I can probably handle. The question is, can you recommend how individuals and companies new to this space can connect and learn more? Maybe, for example, conferences that you or your clients have found valuable. I think one of the important components here is, obviously HTA is a fantastic organization that provides a phenomenal amount of content for kind of emerging companies. So obviously we want to make sure that, you have access to this educational content here on an ongoing basis. But there's also other kind of conferences and summits that can be attended. I believe there's a CAR TCR Digital Week going on. There's going to be a meeting on the MESA from the Alliance of Regenerative Medicine coming up in early October. And of course, just making sure that you kind of keep up to speed with really kind of any sort of notifications and education that Veneti and Cardinal Health are putting out as well. We want to make sure that, we're educating really everybody that we're working with as we're learning more as we're going throughout this space. Really as an industry, I think we all as a whole are learning and want to really work to develop the best processes and solutions for kind of emerging companies. So with that, I don't know, Heidi, if you or Shantice, if you guys have any closing comments, but if not, it looks like we're right about at time here.
I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate in this webinar. We'll be happy to answer any questions, that you have offline. So please put them into the chat room that's available to you. And, something to think about is that there's a great opportunity for us really to standardize and move these products forward. I think that the partnership that Veneti and Cardinal have established is a good way to think about really managing your product in a very dispersed ecosystem, in a new ecosystem, really from the inception of order through post of distribution. So we look forward to talking with everybody and anybody about this. And if you want more information, I think we've got contact information for you here. So thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to meet with us for this hour today and listen to our discussion. And we so on what Heidi said. Our information is out there if you have any specific questions that you'd like to ask or any points of discussion that you'd like to cover. We'd be happy to have an opportunity to speak with anyone who is interested. Thank you.
And I also want to say thank you to Shantice, John, and Heidi for speaking. We really appreciate your time as well as your presentation and answering the questions. As a reminder, this presentation is made available by Friday, September 8th. You will receive an email with the link to the slides and the recording when they're posted to our website. We also want to give our audience a quick reminder to register for the 2020 Traceability Online Seminar, November 2nd through the 4th, 2020. Thank you again to our sponsor, Cardinal Health 3PL Services. If you have any questions for HCA, you can see my contact information as well as Ann Neville, Vice President of Industry Education. And I want to thank everyone for participating. You'll be asked a quick 2-question survey as you exit today. The survey should automatically appear in your browser window. We really appreciate your feedback. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much.